Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, where we'll be discussing Agile PPM with OnePlan and Azure DevOps. My name is Doug Welsby, and I'm the channel manager here at Wicresoft. I'm also joined by my colleagues, Jose Levy, our practice director of Azure Cloud Services and Agile PPM, and Matt Willey, our OnePlan product specialist. During today's webinar, attendees will be on mute and the line will not be open for questions. However, feel free to use the GoToWebinar question feature to submit questions. I will address these questions during the webinar and will respond via email if we do not get to your specific question. If for some reason you get distracted or pulled away during the webinar, no need to worry, as I'll be emailing a link to the presentation once it has been posted to our YouTube channel. And with that, I'll now turn the presentation over to Jose, who will be handling the webinar.
Thanks, Doug. And thank you everyone for joining us. This is a continuation of the theme of Agile PPM that we've been presenting since the beginning of the year. And today we're going to go a little deeper into our OnePlan solution with Azure DevOps for Agile PPM. It's a quick introduction for those folks that are not aware of us. Well, we are Wicresoft, your business transformation partner. We deliver advisory solutions and operations. Some of our statistics are shown there. Fairly larger organization within the Microsoft ecosystem. And I manage the Azure services, cloud services, which includes Azure, and our Agile PPM. Within that solution set, we are supporting organizations in doing enterprise agile transformations in different modes, whether it's scaled agile, nexus-less, or hybrid bimodal approach, depending on where the organization is in terms of agile adoption. We have our enterprise agile PPM solution, which we'll be showing today for Azure DevOps. We also provide DevOps implementation and staffing and training, as well as I mentioned before, our cloud services, which is bringing together the power of cloud in its different modes to your organization. So I want to start by framing what we're hearing from customers, what the organizational situation is right now in terms of agile transformation, and these are actual statements that we're getting from customers, and all the challenges really have to do with being able to enable teams to work in agile Scrum Agile methods, allow them to use different tools, allow them to achieve more in a self-organized way, but at the same time, the organization still wants to view portfolios, understand investments, understand how everything can be delivered accordingly in order to provide the greatest value. There's also challenges with respect to resource availability and seeing across multiple teams. Also with respect to financial tracking across all of those different teams that might be working in all those products. So it's more about providing the perspective of all the work that's being accomplished in a Scrum Agile way. So the solution gaps that I've stated is really what we're trying to address for the organization. And really, it's also about all of the different perspectives that portfolio means, because portfolio can mean something to a product owner as well as a Scrum Master or Scrums, depending on where you are in that delivery hierarchy. So we need to be able to also address summaries of data across strategic themes, whether you're planning initially planning top down or you're looking at results bottom up. There's obviously the concept of portfolio in whichever way you might be managing it. whether it's including value streams or not. If you're using implementing or using SAFe, then the concept of program will come into play. So that's also an important perspective. And then the rest of the work hierarchy with Scrum Agile, which is epics, obviously, and the work underneath those epics. But there's also application and product. So if you group work and sprints according to those, what are you actually delivering? So we're trying to provide that portfolio perspective to all the different stakeholders in whatever way they need, while at the same time solving this gap of having financial management, resource management, status reporting, bimodal planning in the event that you're also including waterfall projects, and also the final, which is leading to DevOps integration, and that's where we talk about Azure DevOps. So in today's presentation, we're going to address Enterprise Agile from a SAFe perspective. Now, just want to state that this is one of multiple frameworks for Enterprise Agile. You don't have to subscribe to this one. It's the one that's most common, and it's the one that we hear the most, so that's why we're addressing it. But if you have a particular style or method, by all means, our solution can accommodate it. So just want to make sure that while we're referencing this, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only way to resolve your own Enterprise Agile challenge. And if we get into the scenarios, what we've tried to do is provide capabilities for every one of the users in the Enterprise Agile perspective. So obviously we have a portfolio manager that's trying to understand the business value. You're trying to see the big picture across teams and delivery timeframes or programs, and you're trying to make better decisions. This is the highest level and probably the one tied to leadership. When we get down to product owner and Scrum Master, this takes into account probably the folks that already exist in the organization or have been working for some time in an agile fashion. And here we're trying to add the additional perspective of all the work performed, planned and unplanned, and what all of that work means in terms of the constraints for resources, because we don't have unlimited resources, so we have to plan accordingly. If you happen to have project managers still working in waterfall, well, we need to be able to see that from a portfolio perspective. So how can they actually come into the picture? And in our case, we implement Microsoft Project and the Microsoft Project platform. So how can we integrate that into an agile solution so that work can also be taken into account? And then finally, if from an IT enterprise architecture perspective, what we're trying to do is leverage the Microsoft Cloud solutions and avoid duplicity, so that we can see all of the work on a single platform and meet the end user needs of being able to manage agile and non-agile, while at the same time lowering cost and maintaining the least number of applications. So we're going to present our Azure DevOps solution with OnePlan. And as I said earlier, what we're trying to do is bring the portfolio planning, cost, business value, resource management, and insights into the solution so that you can have that lean portfolio management perspective. If you have other tools that you're using, you can also leverage them because we have the capability to integrate that data set. But in this example and in this solution that we're going to be discussing, we are starting from the premise that you are using Azure DevOps and Azure Boards specifically, which I'll talk about in a second, and you're going to be working within that solution primarily. So, the value that OnePlan brings to Azure DevOps, as you see, we have a few points there. The first is we have a user experience that's entirely in Azure DevOps. What that means is we call it a fused user experience. The user does not have to really leave Azure DevOps. OnePlan is presented directly within the solution. It's rendered directly with the solution. You can work within it without actually having to be in another application. You have portfolio planning capabilities for all stakeholders. As I was saying earlier, from the Scrum Master all the way to a portfolio program manager, even leadership can actually go and see the current status of all the work that's being delivered. Talked about the integration of Agile and non-Agile planning tools, depending on what you're using, through our OneConnect platform. And finally, whichever Enterprise Agile hierarchy you're using, we can reflect it within OnePlan and Azure DevOps. In this case, like I said, we're going to be referencing SAFe, but if you happen to have another one, our solution allows you to do that. There's obviously data going back and forth between OnePlan and Azure DevOps to make sure that all the data set is seamless. So I'll talk real quickly a little bit deeper about the features and give you a feature flash, and then we'll have Matthew give us a demonstration. So the first is that although we mentioned Azure DevOps, we're really addressing or working within Azure Boards. And that's really our starting point for teams to define work. And it has a full capability for Kanban boards, backlogs, teams. I mean, it's a fairly well defined solution. It allows a team to work in a Scrum Agile capability, and you can go all the way from ideas to release, and work in whatever Scrum style that you're working in. So that our OnePlan solution actually integrates with this component of Azure DevOps, as you'll see in a minute. We talked about ideation, and even if you wanted to start outside of Azure DevOps and actually allow the entire organization to submit ideas, you can do that with OnePlan. So, in this case, we actually have it showing in Teams, which is also a capability that OnePlan has. But the concept is that you have the ability to have the entire organization submit ideas and go through an ideation process before it actually gets into what will be product and delivery within Azure DevOps. So that is provided by OnePlan. Here's where we get to the portfolio planning that I was referring to. These are the core features for portfolio planning within OnePlan. It's about doing planning top down, and then allowing the teams to break down work in the way that they will be able to deliver it. And you have benefits, cost, and strategic alignment. So we'll be showing how we have strategic themes within the solution in this case, and how that actually breaks down into programs and epics. The more important feature, and the one that we get the most requests for, has to do with resource demand. So once all of this has been actually deconstructed, how does that compare to availability of resources, and can we actually meet the delivery timeframes from our product owners? And that's where the Scrum Master or Project Manager has the ability, even at a epic level or sprint level, to see what's going on with resource availability. So very valuable feature set that adds added to Azure DevOps. And depending on, again, how your style of planning is, whether you're rebalancing at program increments, if you're doing programs, here is really giving the Scrum Master and the product owner the ability to define whether they can actually accept or reject proposals on adding additional resources to sprints and increments. So it's intended to, as a tool for the teams and the Scrum Master and the product owner. The second component, we do still have to track cost. At the end of the day, even if you're using, if you're doing budgeting in a lean portfolio way, we still have to understand how much has been spent and what's the forecast related to the completion of our program. So OnePlan for Azure DevOps gives you the ability to go in and not only plan but then track your actuals and understand the forecast for the rest of the completion. If you want to actually go into true return on investment, you can do that also, because we give you the ability to see how you have actually finished with actuals, both labor and non-labor costs. All really cost types that you might have within your costing structure. Looking at timelines, so we have several ways of viewing work through time, whether it's a roadmap or Gantt, and whether you're actually including Agile and non-Agile work also, which is another important component. So all the consolidated views at every level of your planning. Here we have an epic view, an epic timeline, but if you wanted to go and look at a higher level, you could, or either program or even strategic themes, which we'll show in a second. So at the highest levels, you can actually see delivery timelines. Another area of interest is capturing time on work. So there is the OnePlan does have the ability to have a formal timesheet in the event that you are interested in having team members capture actual work and really understand the cost that it's taken to actually deliver a particular, whether it's feature epic program. You can see the actual work from team members. And then finally, what really this is all about is providing analysis and insights to not only leadership, but all the different stakeholders. So in this case, what we're trying to do is enable better decision making by having all of this data set from portfolios being completed in Azure DevOps. So we rely on Power BI, and we have a deep set of reports and content packs specifically for Enterprise Agile. So what I'll do now, I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Matthew Willey, who's going to do the presentation.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jose. All right, so I'm logged in here into Azure DevOps, and what we're looking at right now is the Azure Boards feature that Jose was talking about. Within the boards here, I can set this up so I can start out and do some high-level top-down planning and then utilize OnePlan to add in some extra capabilities to that, as Jose was talking about, financials, resource, etc. And so I can start at the very highest level, building out my strategic themes. From there, I could break those down into different programs. I could break those then down into epics and so on and so forth. You're not locked into this particular hierarchy by any means, depending on which methodology you're using and which, if you're using SAFe, which version of SAFe, you may have more or less levels in there. And that's completely fine. Also, to throw some new ideas into the mix, you don't have to just plan this all out top down from here. We can also allow some ideation to happen, which will then flow into this planning process as well. And those ideas can be captured a variety of ways. Here, what you're seeing is I'm in teams, and we can set up a team where people can come in, all from say all around the business or whatever groups of users that you want, stakeholders, customers, whoever it might be, can come in and submit ideas that you can then review that might end up turning into new epics and or new programs, etc. And this can also be done via Power Apps, so people can do this right from their mobile phone if they wanted to do so. And or we can post these things on, say, company portal pages, in SharePoint. There's lots of different opportunities here, but the basics of it is we can have an idea portal where people can put in ideas that will then flow into this process, and then I can just simply drag and drop them to align them into the right, say, program and or theme. So it falls into your hierarchy properly. From there, I might want to start doing some high-level planning before we even approve this, right? And so I'm going to go into one of my programs here, my e-commerce portal development program. And you can also do this, say, at the epic level or at whatever level that you want, depending on what level you want to track your resources and your budgets at. Some people choose to be more detailed. Some people choose to do it at a little higher level, like I'm doing it here today at the program level. And what you'll first see here is we have all of our program details in here. We've put in some high-level dates, and there's some totals of financials here. But a lot of times people need to do time phase, so meaning by month, by quarter, by year types of financials. Break that out into, say, capital and operational expenses, et cetera, et cetera. Need a little more detail than that before we can go and get this approved. And so to do that, I'm going to click on the OnePlan tab here. And that's going to load up OnePlan right here within inside of this program, so I can start to build out some of those details. So initially, I might start out with a high-level resource plan, which can then in turn turn into my labor costs. So if I come here to my resource plan tab, let's say I'm going to need a team. In this case, I've asked for team 3 for the next period of time. I'm doing this right now in months and percents, but I could switch to FTEs if you were looking for more of an FTE view of the world. And I can also switch this to, say, by quarters or by year, depending on what level of detail you're trying to look at here and you want to plan by. But the basics of this is we're going to need some resources to come in and work on this program and or epic, etc. And we need to forecast that in the future. How many resources am I going to need? Am I going to need 1 team, 2 teams, 3 teams? Am I going to need some specific people with some specific skill sets? And for how long am I going to need them for? And so this resource planner allows you to do just that. Put in the basics here. It's very much like an online Excel spreadsheet kind of a format. So you can kind of key this in, find the resources that you want, and build out a high-level resource plan fairly quickly. So at this point, I'm not doing any detailed planning, right? I haven't built out user stories and every little task and bug and all of that. I just know that based off of the swag or the high-level estimate it's going to take to do this, bucket of work that we're looking at doing, I'm going to need some resources. Here's about what I think I'm going to need. From there, then, I can convert this more into the financial view of the world. So then I can come in, I can hit import here, and it's going to import those costs based off of the resource plan that I put together, and it'll total up and give me my labor cost here. So I don't have to go and try to manually calculate that. Generally speaking, we would do that using blended rates and such so that we can get those high-level estimates. From there, you can key in any other costs. There's not necessarily just labor costs. We may have contracts and materials and supplies, software that we may need to purchase, et cetera. And that all rolls up to my total budget to say, okay, for this program, in this case, I think I'm going to need $1.1 million to go and do this, right? And you can also track things like benefits. Later on, we can track forecasts and actuals in here. So this cost planning tool can be used later on throughout the process as well. Another important capability in here is I may need to put in a high-level roadmap or plan for this program and when things are going to happen. And so we can do that here right within Azure DevOps. I can come in and I can build out, say, the different phases and stages that this is going to be in, or I can organize it other ways and really build out high level from a timing perspective. How long do we think it's going to take to go implement this program, or at least an MVP version of it and or epic, et cetera. So that can be a really nice way to go and do that. And it's a little bit separate. It's a little bit removed from the user stories, tasks, and bugs and such. We're going to be ever adding those and building out our backlogs and all this, and it can be sometimes hard to understand, okay, well, when am I going to get the value? When is this actually going to be delivered? And so these pieces of information can then be rolled up into our high-level roadmaps, which we'll see in a little bit. So at that point, I've now gone in, I've kind of built out my business case. I've put in some information here around what we're trying to do. I've put in a high-level resource plan. I've put in my high-level budget. And now we can go through an approval process to go get this approved. But instead of just, saying, do you approve yes or no, OnePlan actually extends the capabilities of Azure DevOps and gives you some capabilities to allow you to come in and do some portfolio planning and selection and some what-if scenarios to figure out when should we do these things based off the value that they're going to give us. When can we do these within our constraints? We only have a certain amount of resources as well as budget. And so, keeping those things in mind, how can we go and build out our roadmap within our constraints and to get the most valuable things done first so we can start driving that value back to the business? And so what I've done here is I've switched into my portfolio analysis view here. And what we're looking at is basically the same thing, a replica of what we just saw over in Azure DevOps. And so you can see here I have my strategic themes broken down into programs and then into my different epics and so on and so forth here. And I can start to do some prioritization. Well, how and why should I do this prioritization? Well, you might use things like, say, WSJF, weighted shortest job first. So based off of some information that I put in, a high-level swag, how risky do we think this is? How time critical is this? Meaning, what's the loss if we do it later rather than sooner? And that all rolls up and gives me a WSJF score. We're not locked into WSJF by any means, but SAFe does recommend that, as well as many other portfolio management, Agile portfolio management models. But we can use other types of prioritization scores if need be as well. And accommodate and or multiples in here to, utilize while you're making these types of choices. I can also put things in here like more traditional ROIs, NPVs, IRRs. If we're capturing that information, then we can use that to make some decisions here as well, in my view. So from there, we can prioritize just directly within a particular, say, program. So I can now drag and drop and move things around within programs and within strategic themes. Or if I wanted to, I could focus on, say, down to my epic level. Here's a list of all my epics across all programs, across all strategic themes, right? And or come in and utilize the filter to filter this down. I just want to look at the epics within this program or these two programs or this theme or, whatever it might be. So you can, get it down to the list of the items that you're looking to prioritize, is basically what I'm saying. And from there, it can be as simple as drag and drop. I can come here and drag and drop this guy up 2 more and say, oh, this one looks pretty good. It has a high WSJF. I want to bump that up a couple notches. And so simply just doing some ranked stacking, drag and dropping of these items based off of the information that's there. Now you might be saying, well, I can already do dragging and dropping right within Azure DevOps, and that's absolutely true. This adds on a couple extra layers. Number one is I can pull up my timeline over here on the side, and I could show this, say, by program increment and or quarter, month, year, whatever level of detail that you want to show. And you can see where people are asking for these things to be done and about how long they're planning on taking. And so this is starting to show me a view of what my roadmap could be, right? We haven't locked this in yet, but it's what it could be. But the problem is if we do all these things at the times people are asking them to be done, we may have some issues. We might have some constraint issues. Specifically, we might have financial budget problems and or resource problems. And so what I can overlay on top of this down below here is a financial view. If we were to do all of these projects, and I can create a target is basically a budget. So let's say this was for my IDT department as a whole, and I only have, in this case, $100,000 a month, and or I could switch this to do it quarterly if I wanted to, maybe, look at it whatever level of detail that you want. $300,000 a quarter in this case, then you can see we're going to have some budget issues if we do all of these things, right? So how do we go and fix that? And there's some easy ways to do some what-if scenarios around how we can solve these problems. Number one is we can scroll to the bottom here to some of these lower priority epics that we're looking at right now and say, what if we don't do these? And simply come in here and just uncheck these. When I do that, you'll notice it reloads down here, and we now have some greens. And so as I continue to do that and take off, my bottom items, and basically you're saying we're not going to do those and or we're going to put them on hold for a period of time. That can help us to solve some of our budget issues. That may not be an option. Maybe these are things that we have to do, so I can check these back up. My other option is, well, we can take some of these lower priority items over here and we can simply drag them out and say, well, what if we were to delay them for 3 months, 6 months, whatever it might be, and we can drag and drop and move these guys around and see how that then affects our costs down below. And you can see it will continue refreshing there until we get to a scenario that we want. And so that's from more of a cost perspective, making sure that we stay within our budget constraints. Another option, though, is what if we get more budget? So I can create another target that has a higher budget and then see how that then rolls up and if that's going to fix our issues. And maybe as a business, we're willing to make a bigger investment there, right? So that's more on the financial side of things, but then we can do the same more from a resource perspective here as well. And so I can look at my different resources here, in this case, my different teams, if you're doing planning by teams and or if you're getting down to named people, you can see you can do either or here. And I can see where I have issues, where I have constraints. Again, I can look at that by month, or I can switch this over to by quarter and see where all the issues are, where we have some reds and over allocations and so on and so forth here. And so you can see, for example, Team 2 has some issues through August through November here, and it's because we're asking them to work on 2 different epics at the same time. So that's a problem. There's a conflict there that we need to figure out how to resolve. Again, we have the same options at our disposal. We can come in and we can start to uncheck maybe one of these epics and say, what if we don't do one of these, especially if it's lower priority? We can uncheck that, and or we can move things around and see how we can say maybe move one of the lower priority ones out a little bit so that there's not that conflict anymore, right? And as I'm dragging and dropping and checking and unchecking, that's all going to update in real time down in the bottom. Once I get it all the way I want it, then I can come in and I can save these as scenarios, and I can come back to them at any time. So scenario A, maybe we're not going to do these bottom 3 epics. That solves all of our problems. Scenario B, we need to just move those 3 epics out 6 months, 8 months, whatever it might be. And then as a business, with our, say, steering committee, we can come through and figure out who is going, what are we going to do? Which option are we going to go with? Are we going to provide more funding and or more resources? Are we going to not do these items, or are we going to move these things out so that we can stay within our constraints? And so the goal here of this particular portfolio analysis module is just that, high-level top-down prioritization, but while keeping in mind our constraints of both cost and resources. Once I get it the way I want it, I can then commit that scenario and then really, go and start actually executing on it, right? And so I would do that the same way I might always do. So back over in Azure DevOps, I could start to build out my user stories and detailed tasks and bugs and, so on and so forth here, under these different items, and utilize the Kanban boards within here to update the status, dragging and dropping from one status to the next, and so on and so forth. All the tools and features and capabilities that you're already possibly using in Azure DevOps here to do that. As you're working on it, one thing that OnePlan adds that Jose had mentioned, though, is that you have the ability for those team members to actually come in and fill out timesheets on these things. And so in true, pure Agile, you shouldn't have to fill out a timesheet because you're only working on one thing at a time. But we find in real world scenarios that's not always the case, and or companies, finance, accounting, etc., require people to fill out timesheets to get paid, and or for auditing type purposes and so on and so forth. So in a business and an enterprise, if you do have a requirement for timesheets, we provide the ability to do that right through Azure DevOps. So these are all the items that I've been assigned, whether those be user stories, task bugs, etc. And then I can simply just come in and fill in my time on these things, as I've worked on them over the week, save and submit, and that can go through an approval process and roll back then into your actuals on that particular, say, epic. So we provide those capabilities as well if needed. On top of that, a lot of people have some real concerns and real needs around resource capacity planning. And so if I'm more of a resource manager, someone who's trying to make sure that our resources are being utilized but not over allocated across all the different work that's going on, then I can come into a capacity planning view, very similar to the view you saw earlier, but it's just full screen and meant specifically for a resource manager. And I can come in and do things like I just want to look at my teams, for example, and see all my different teams and who's working on what within different periods of time. And then I can come here and I can, go into say team 3 and see where the demand is coming from and where the issues are, and work with the teams to get that view of what's going on and start to make adjustments and figure out how we're going to get this all done. Maybe we need to bring another team online, or maybe we need to get one of these projects pushed out, or whatever it might be. And this is actually all editable, so I could simply drag and drop things around and so on and so forth, if that is your process and that's what you're looking to do. From there, as these epics, programs, etc., are going on through the different program increments, people want reports, generally status reports, with lots of different useful information, so we can see how things are going. Are we on track? Are we off track? And from all the different aspects, are we on track from a timing perspective, from a budget perspective, and just overall, how are things going? And so what this view here is a Power BI report that shows what we're calling our portfolio health summary. And you'll see it mimics the same structure. It is the same structure as we saw before. So I have strategic themes broken into programs with my different epics below that. And at each level, I can see the status of these items. I can track metrics that SAFe recommends, like say release predictability, which is basically a calculation of, we said we were going to do 10 things. If we only did 8 of them, then that's an 80% predictability. And so the higher your predictability is, the better you're doing at a planning job. So that can be a useful metric to track. Things like quality types of metrics, like just say easy counts of defects, whatever it might be. We can also look at those budgets versus forecasts and actual costs as they're rolling back in. We can even integrate in with financial systems like say SAP, Oracle, etc., PeopleSoft, Workday, to pull in those actual costs from the source of record, the financial system, to pull this all together. And that's just one example of a report. There are many different tabs here depending on what you're interested in. If I want to see cumulative costs over time, for example, then I can come into that report and see how my costs are building over time. Or if I'm more interested in resources, I can come into the resource management report view, so on and so forth. So there's a full report pack here that will give you visibility and allow you to then communicate that status and how things are going and analyze what's happening to your stakeholders, to your customers, both internal, external, etc. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jose for a few more closing slides, and then we'll let you guys go for the day.
Thank you, Matthew.
No problem.
So just want to provide some additional insight into how you would actually implement a solution like this. So we bring to the table a full set of, based on our approach of advisory solution and operations, a full set of services to ensure that you have true adoption of this approach, this methodology within your organization. So it usually starts with just a quick assessment to understand where you're at, whether you've started on Agile Transformation or not, and what your objectives are. That can lead to what we call a full business strategy workshop, which is a planning exercise to really understand how to succeed before even getting started. The solution is obviously what you just saw in terms of having OnePlan and Azure DevOps come together to provide your Agile PPM, and we can do that through an evaluation and understanding your planning structure. We do have the advisory capability to do the Agile PPM implementation, like I said, if you haven't started, and then there's additional services in terms of our staffing and training that we can provide. For anybody that's interested, the first part, which is just the assessment and roadmap of how to get going with Agile PPM, more than happy to make contact with us in order to have that dialogue and understand how we can make that happen in your organization. Also, if you're interested in just evaluating the solution that you saw today, feel free to make contact so that we can give you a deeper dive into how we can add value to your organization. At any time, please make contact, and we can actually also do a demo so you can actually see the solution in your context, how it can work for you and your organization. With that, I will close today's webinar. I want to thank everyone for joining, and please look forward to our additional announcements on webinars on this topic. We'll be going deeper into the actual portfolio selection and prioritization topics in the near future. So look forward to having you in those webinars so we can provide more insights on how to solve this challenge. Thanks again, and look forward to our next webinar.